Hi, everyone, and welcome to CDK Survey shows consumers are confused about electric vehicles. This automotive news webinar is brought to you by CDK Global. We're delighted you're with us for this presentation. I'm Emma Hancock, host, strategist, and moderator at Automotive News. Before I introduce our speakers today, a navigation tip. We encourage you to ask questions at any time. Just type them into the Q&A box on the left side of the webinar window and then hit send. I will steer your questions to our speakers toward the end of the session. Today's speakers are Peter Kahn, Head of Research at CDK Global, with over 20 years of experience in researching all aspects of the automotive retail industry. Peter's work is focused mainly on how dealerships and brands can improve efficiencies and meet the changing needs of the vehicle buyer service consumer. Also speaking today is David Thomas, Director of Content Marketing at CDK Global. As Director of Content Marketing, David champions thought leadership across all platforms, connecting CDK's vast expertise to the broader market and trends driving our industry forward. And now I'll turn it over to Peter and Dave to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Emma. Really appreciate the introduction. And thank you, everybody in the audience, for tuning into this webinar. So what way we're going to work through this is that I'm the research guy, the nerd, so to speak, and I'll be talking about what we found out from our survey takers that we interviewed, and going through a couple of slides, and then I'll pass it over to Dave, who will pick it up, and then each one of us will kind of provide our own context on what are we learning from these results, what's our insight, and how do dealers want to think about our different customers. So we've done a number of EV surveys in the past, and I quite frankly would say, and the last one we did was maybe about a year ago, they were fairly similar to what you may have seen if you're following this EV space. What the benefits are, what the issues are. We wanted to do something different this time. And so what we ended up with was a 4-part research project that we're working on. This is part 1. And part 1 is all about going to our shoppers, people that are interested in buying an EV, and understanding from them, why are they going to buy that vehicle, or what are their concerns? But we also want to hear from folks that are not going to buy an EV. Maybe they think they're going to buy it sometime later, so they may stay with a gas vehicle, or they may say, I'm going to transition and go to a hybrid vehicle. So that's who we're hearing from in this webinar today. We have 3 more projects that are right behind this one. We're going to find out from folks that actually own an EV, who've had one for 6 months, what their experience has been like. They had claims, they had beliefs, they got the car. What's their experience been like, and how's that worked out for them? We're also turning around from the customer point of view and going to the dealer side in 2 surveys. One being getting your dealership ready for fixed operations. What does that entail? How do you think about training, facilities, tooling, all those areas? We're going to bring that back to you all. And then the last part of the series will be getting your whole dealership ready for selling EVs and how you need to think about that. This 4-part series, we'll be finishing it up by the end of December, and we'll be publishing it all for something that we would provide at NADA and then after NADA. So backing around and talking about this project, these are the questions that we went out to research. Who's the BEV shopper and why? What's motivating them? How does the choice of a hybrid fit in? What's the future for hybrids look like? And how are hybrid shoppers thinking about that? What does it look like as we go into the future as far as EV adoption, either hybrid or EV or battery EV? And then how does the dealership fit in? So those are the topics we're going to be covering today. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the EV shopper. And I want to talk about the research methodology itself. What we do, and this I'm going to give you a little bit of nerd speak, it's called a Gen Pop survey, or we go to the general population, and that is basically going out to a whole bunch of folks across the United States in urban, suburban, and rural areas, male and female, different levels of income, different levels of education, and essentially bring those results back so we get what we would consider a good representation of that car buying public. So we feel pretty good that we got the sample we wanted. Just real quickly, we got a good spread on the different generations. We have the same when it comes to income levels, education, geography, et cetera. And then the same with gender. But one thing I want to make very clear, and this is really important, is that we, aside from the general population audience, we wanted to hear from each of these groups. The person who's going to buy in the next 6 months and is primarily thinking about buying a battery electric vehicle. The person who's thinking about buying a hybrid, again, primary vehicle they're considering, and the person that says, nope, my next vehicle that I'm going to buy in the next 6 months is going to be gas. And you can see that spread there. And I think we got generally equal representation from all three groups, and that's who we're going to hear from in this project. So we have a poll question for you all. And I think the first poll question is we want to get a sense from you of these three different groups, who drives the most? And if you can push that poll out, that'd be great. All right, I think we've got a pretty good representation now. So the question is, who drives more every day? And here are the results, interestingly enough. Gas wins, from what I'm seeing here. EV, folks buying BEVs probably drive the least. All right, so it's good to know. Let's look at how our survey came out. Interestingly enough, here's the commute for gas shoppers. And on average, they say I drive about 15 miles. Very similar for hybrid, 14 miles, so about the same. They're driving about 15 miles, 14 miles every day. But interestingly enough, the BEV drivers are driving on average 20 miles a day. So if I'm thinking about buying a BEV, I'm kind of thinking in the context that I actually do a fair amount of daily commuting, as compared to, say, a gas shopper or a hybrid shopper. A little bit, it was surprising for us, and it may be surprising based on the poll results, for you all in the audience as well. Now, aside from daily commute, let's look a little bit more about average miles per year. And here we're seeing across the board, and there's I believe the average miles driven for a typical U.S. driver is about 12 to 13,000 miles. And you can see here that this, again, the results we got from average miles is actually skewing much more toward the electric vehicle drivers. So again, surprising that while we thought the gas drivers would be driving more, turns out in daily driving and in average miles driven annually, the folks that are thinking about a BEV are going to be driving more. Some thoughts and opinions on that. We know that gas has gotten extremely expensive, and folks are looking at BEV as a possible alternative to save money on that daily commute cost, and then the average annual driving as well. I think when we think about how far somebody's going to drive, sometimes we get a little bit confused between, say, driving around and doing errands, picking up the kids, going to the job, et cetera, and then taking those long trips. And it's those long trips, I think, that's giving a lot of people pause as it relates to becoming a BEV buyer. So let's look at that real quickly. Turns out, oops, I'm sorry. Yikes, slide control. There we go. Turns out that looking across the board here, this is the sweet spot for what people who are thinking about a BEV, how many miles they want to get off a full charge. So you can see gas shoppers, hybrid shoppers, and BEV shoppers. It turns out certainly from, say, 400 to 450 miles, certainly on the 450 miles plus, that's where the gas shopper is thinking that's the kind of car I need. But interesting enough, between 300 to 350 miles for the full range is kind of a comfort zone for a BEV driver. So if you add up from less than 200 miles all the way up to, say, 350, we're picking up 3 out of 4 of those shoppers that say, if that car gets between 300 and 350 miles, I'm good with that. So that gives us an idea not only of that daily commute and that average per year driving, but also how people are feeling comfortable with regards to taking a long trip and then planning out where they're going to have to charge, if they're going to have to charge at all. All right, so moving on with that, how loyal are buyers when it comes to electric vehicles? Are they willing to switch if they get a better charging experience? We know that charging for a lot of people causes a lot of anxiety, particularly if they're going to drive a long distance. Certainly, there is a question of brand loyalty. When we look at that hybrid shopper, certainly the hybrid shopper is willing to switch to another brand if they can find a model that has a longer driving range. And the gas shopper, not so much. But again, if another brand is coming along with a vehicle that has, again, longer distance between charges, they're willing to consider that as well. I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit on that. And we think about some of the vehicles that are out there now and that have been popular. I mean, certainly the ones that are selling a lot, and I'll happen to mention Tesla as a great example. You know, they're always focusing on longer range. And so there has been, as we all know, when it comes to BEV purchases, a lot of brand defection to a brand that didn't exist 10 years ago. So the shoppers are open. They have some level of brand loyalty, but they're open to switching. One last thing here, and that is the idea of a better charging network, which kind of goes hand in glove with the idea of longer driving range. Again, people will switch to another brand if they feel like there's a better charging network out there that's easier to find, it's easier to plug into, it's easier to use. Dave, you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's you know, when we talk about different brands, I mean, when you look at these numbers, it's clear right now that kind of Tesla owns these areas for now, especially on that infrastructure side, and we know they're pushing that as their advantage. And so this data kind of shows that these shoppers that could be turned to looking at EVs, they're going to consider that brand. It's going to be right now, it would probably be Tesla.
Yep. Let's dig a little bit more into that and just look at how that's been laid out. Again, asking the folks that responded to our survey, we're seeing that, you know, brands with the best EVs from a BEV shopper standpoint, you know, basically 50% said Tesla would be number one in there as far as the best EV. And when we think about sales of EVs, and I think what I've seen the latest stat, which was Q2 end, the sales of 557,000 new BEV units sold throughout the U.S., 1 out of 2 is a Tesla. So the folks that are considering buying a BEV, and then those folks who have actually bought an EV, the Tesla's picking 1 out of 2. It's a big drop off, as you can see, when it comes to some of their brands. And so there needs to be some more, you know, brand visibility, brand promise, and folks feeling comfortable that these other folks have a good EV as well. What about the hybrid shopper? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we'd throw in this little comment here. It's interesting. We pulled this out of a Reddit thread. Not necessarily a great story. They didn't necessarily have a good experience at the dealership, and just, you know, zooming ahead real quickly, which we'll come to, and that is talking about how the dealership can help sell these cars. You know, it's all about selling it. I believe it's all about selling a car. If somebody is a BEV intender, then, you know, that's how you do your needs assessment, and that's how you determine that. If somebody is a gas intender, you do your needs assessment, and that's how you determine that. I think it's really important that the dealership doesn't necessarily push the agenda, but understand what that shopper's looking for and what they're comfortable with, and then, you know, make that selection and help them get to the inventory that they want to buy. And that honestly is a big reason why we did this study, is to really get an understanding of these different intenders, and then, you know, helping dealerships do those needs assessments, do those qualifications, and then determine, you know, which product am I going to show this customer. Just jumping ahead real quick to the hybrid shopper, as I mentioned. This shows the strength of Toyota. They've had a really good track record for hybrids over the last 10 years or so. And people recognize that, you know, Toyota is a pretty good choice when it comes to considering hybrids. All right. Thinking a little bit more about that BEV intender, the person that may want to buy a BEV. And it turns out this is a real constraint for where we think these vehicles are going to go in the future. Right now, most of the folks that say, I'm probably going to buy a BEV, own a home. And why is that? It takes a lot of the stress and problems out of charging the vehicle, because quite frankly, you know, you do, again, back to that daily commute, you go to your job, you do your errands, you pick up your kids, you bring it home, you plug it in. Next morning you wake up, you got a full tank of gas, no muss, no fuss, and actually minimal cost, depending again on what your electrical rates are in the part of the country you're in. If you don't have a If you don't have a home, then it becomes much more difficult. Living in an apartment, do they have a charging system nearby, townhouse, et cetera? So just thinking about where we are today, the market, at least today, for electric vehicles is very much oriented toward those folks that own a home. What about the folks that don't own a home? We just got an idea of those folks. Where are they going to charge their vehicle? And you can kind of see how they're thinking about that. But this was about 10 to 12% of the total folks that are primary BEV intenders. They said, I don't have a home and I'm going to have to find another way to get my vehicle charged. And so this is a major constraint if we are thinking about selling BEVs. These folks are probably better oriented toward hybrid or gas, at least at this point. Dave, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and I take it like, I look at this number and I think of the state of adoption that we're at right now. And I look at this number and I think this is good. This is who should be buying EVs right now. People that own a home and know what their daily commute is like and can get the best use out of what an EV provides right now. And it's really this focus. There's an overweight focus, at least in my opinion, on the road trip, on the furthest you can possibly drive in an EV, and that we saw the range numbers deciding factor for a lot of these shoppers, et cetera. But the day-to-day with the people buying them and living in homes, that's not really their day-to-day concern. And I've looked into this for many years as we tried to explain this to people. Most home households in the U.S. still have more than one car, 1.8, I think, per household right now. So again, EV, perfect second car. And 50% of people own a home. So, and generally a home with a garage, when you look at that 50% number, that's a lot of people. We don't have enough EVs to sell to all those people. So when you look at it that way, I think there is some positive with these numbers and with that focus on the home charging. And maybe I'm just too much of an optimist. I don't know.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. There's a lot of folks out there that do own a home, and they can see the savings that they would have by just charging off their getting a home charger and charging off that system. There is an opportunity for dealerships possibly to work with local utilities to provide a home charging system, a fast charger. That may be something that, and we know some dealerships are doing that. But yeah, again, going back to on the sales side of dealership operations, as customers come in, whether they are an appointment based or whether they're walk-in, again, doing that needs assessment and understanding maybe this question will help steer again, how do you put product in front of the customer? What product do you put in front of that customer? Something to think about. All right, we're going to switch over to the next section. I'm going to pass the baton over to Dave.
Yeah. So thanks, Peter. Internally, when we start getting all this data back from Peter's team and they start presenting it to us internally, and we start talking about what's really in all this data, with this one, there are some things that we as people in the industry, probably most of the people on this call, just assume everyone knows about EVs, especially on the dealer side around service and maintenance. It is a huge concern that these vehicles may take some of that business away because they should cost less to maintain. They have less moving parts, all that stuff, no oil changes. Again, everyone on this call kind of knows that stuff. So we're gonna put up the second poll here, and I think my results are a little delayed watching the last one. But if everyone could kind of answer this one, it was which shoppers thought it would actually cost more to maintain an EV than another vehicle. And we'll wait a little bit here as folks answer.
I think we're pretty good. Yeah, there's still some stuff coming in. Yeah.
I'm going to wait one more second so I can see. We thought we'd fool a few people, but we're gonna share it. A majority thought gas shoppers would assume this. But then, well, now it's almost half and half.
Did I push the poll too quickly, Dave?
That it was all of the above. So yeah, you can go to the next one. So yes, the thing that really surprised us wasn't necessarily the gas and hybrid shopper thinking these elements were going to cost more for the EV shopper and being wrong, right? These are things that should cost less. The EV shoppers thought the same, which is just a fundamental disconnect between the reality and honestly, the main selling point that people have been saying is the main selling point of the EVs is this low cost of maintenance. I mean, you look at some of these maintenance schedules, the fluids that they have, whether it's brake fluid, it's every few years. And then the liquid cooling for the batteries, a 10-year, service. So they're really long. It should cost less. And on the repair side, again, there's no transmissions to repair, no oil sensors to replace, all that stuff, repairs with collisions and scrapping and all that stuff aside, the repairs should be much less. And EV shoppers, they missed the boat here. What they did get correct, though, was everyone kind of understood the tires would be more expensive, and insurance as well. But yeah, there's some fundamental misunderstanding here that if someone's coming in, even an EV intender, into a dealership to look at those EVs, while it might not be the head of the service department's first thing to mention, on the sales side, it's certainly something that seems to be confusing that you want to explain is a benefit. And don't just assume they know that coming in. And then, with the total price of a vehicle, and Peter put together, this is a really good one, of just, if you need a compact SUV to get you from A to B and your dogs, et cetera, it's very clear here that it gets more expensive as you get to that EV. So everyone's right there. But with these tax incentives, the price of that Model Y, especially on the full tax incentives going to Tesla right now, it becomes a much closer competitive advantage there for them, as everyone else is trying to get that full incentive.
Now, I didn't do this for tax incentives. I put these at MSRP prices.
Right.
Interestingly enough, and this is a global statement, that the Tesla Model Y was the most popular selling vehicle on the planet in 2022. On the planet, the most popular selling vehicle. So people are certainly willing to pay the price to get the goods.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the other things that we looked at, was the idea that tax incentives would make EVs more affordable. We're unsure why being told there's an incentive with money wouldn't, everyone wouldn't put up a higher number. But obviously the gas buyers just think the purchase price is so extravagant, or they are in another realm, that even a tax incentive won't help them get there, which was quite interesting. And then as we move through, the other thing that floored me especially was around leasing. Now, if you pop that one up, Peter, only 10% of the folks that we surveyed considered leasing. They all want to purchase, 90%. And we saw this last year with the survey. It was a very similar number. And on the sales side, in the real world, it's very similar until these new incentives came out, obviously. But the problem, there's a couple things. The folks just didn't know that the tax incentive would be applied to a lease. And you can see the EV shopper said 78% said they'd consider leasing if they understood that the tax incentive, that they weren't going to miss out on the tax incentive. That's what I should have said the first time around. They all feel like they're going to miss out. And the fact is, it's in the lease. You get that $7,500 in the lease. And the other part of it is leasing, especially today before the end of the year, is the simplest way to take advantage of the tax credit. There are a few loopholes with leasing, so you can you get the full tax credit applied if the car's batteries aren't all made in the U.S. All those types of requirements. If your income doesn't meet the requirements, leasing actually basically negates all of those and allows anyone to get that incentive as long as it's part of the lease deal. And we're seeing OEMs that, if you purchased, wouldn't be eligible, really pushing their leases. So that lease number will go up for 2023, no doubt. And the other part of leasing, if you're talking to a customer, is just from the beginning of leasing, the best part about it was after 3 years, if you're not happy, you get a new car, right? And so if someone's like, well, I don't know if I want to go fully into EV, a lease is the perfect vehicle to do that, right? So it's a real surprise that so few people are taking that opportunity. And so I think we'll see that number go up a little this year because of how that tax incentive is being more universal. But it is definitely something that should be talked about on the sales side. And then, yeah, we can just go through this slide. But some of the other advantages of EVs that aren't moving the needle for these gas and hybrid shoppers, that aren't getting them, on board, so to speak, keeping them in their lane, so to speak. They just don't believe some of these advantages. So they're very stark, and gas is definitely a step below. Those gas shoppers are less aware, and we'll get into why in a little bit.
Now, if I was, say, a general sales manager of a dealership and my brand really wanted me to sell EVs, I would look at this information and I think about, okay, so this is what my hybrid and gas shopper thinks. And do I move that type of shopper over to the right vehicle? Or do I think about how do I restructure my marketing campaigns to help customers understand, again, the idea of maybe the BEV for a second car as a commuter car, as saving money. Maybe I want to do something with messaging, the cost of what it takes to charge a BEV, especially if I do home charging. So there's things that looking at this and knowing that at least these are preconceived notions in the mind of each intender. And again, sell the product. But if your brand is saying, hey, we need your help here, and they probably will come around at some point and say, we need your help here, then you can think about your marketing campaign and how you respond to, how your BDC responds to leads and things like that, and have answers, again, in a very positive way to help people start to get a paradigm shift on the idea of maybe I should look at a BEV. Maybe there's a BEV in my future. And so let's talk about that. So I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk about what does this all look like? What does migration look like? I'm going to get a little geeky here, and I apologize. Again, you're talking to the researcher. Researchers got to do this kind of thing. But I think it may help understand the next slide, and that is with any major technology, be it the computer or a smartphone or the internet or what have you, there's kind of what we call a product adoption curve. And typically, the way this works is it starts out, just a few people say, I'm going to do this. And they do it because I want to be the first kid on the block to have this cool new technology, or I just want to tinker with it. Or I just want to feel what it's like. So they're kind of the early adopters, so to speak, but they're like the first to adopt. And that's actually of the entire buying population, that's a pretty small amount. And then the next group that comes along there, some people call them the visionaries. They can kind of see ahead to see what the future looks like. And they take that jump as well. But when we take that whole group, the first adopters and the visionaries, that's pretty small of the total population. And it's kind of like a snowball. The snowball starts small and then it grows and grows and rolls down the hill and grows faster. But there is one difference here. And if for anybody who's ever read this wonderful book, I really recommend it, by Jeffrey Moore, called Crossing the Chasm, which talks about the idea that after you get past those first two groups, there's kind of a stop, because that next group is very practical. They're very, like, where's my benefit? Is how much is it going to cost me, and how am I going to get practical value out of this? That actually turns out to be a very, very big group, but they have those fundamental questions. And until those fundamental questions are answered, they're not going to jump. And that's the chasm. And I guarantee you that the manufacturers and a lot of other folks in this industry understand that and are looking for the way to help the shopper cross that chasm, because once they do, and those very practical minded shoppers say, oh, wow, this could be a great future for me, I should look at it again, that's when you're going to see sales take off. Right now, we've seen, I think for 2023, I mentioned it, 500,000 cars, brand new BEVs been sold. The forecast is for 1 million, out of, I think, 14.7, somewhere around there for the end of the year. So we're still in that early adopter stage. We're still in that, it's kind of suburban, it's coastal and all that, but we need to answer those fundamental questions. But let's look at how our shoppers, the folks we interviewed saw all this. And what we found, interestingly enough, is that the public is open to buying an EV. And so first of all, would you buy an EV in the future? And so we're looking again, gas shoppers, 18% said, yes, I would do that. 47% said, I would consider that. Maybe I'll do that in the future. And in hybrid, as you'd imagine, even more the case, they're more inclined to say, yeah, I probably will be buying a BEV in the future. What does that look like as far as transition? Are they going to do it gradual? Or are they going to do it immediate? Are they immediately going to go to a BEV? And you can see, again, a lot of folks, especially on the gas side, are saying, if I'm considering it, then I'm going to go to a hybrid first. But if I'm a BEV shopper, I'm more likely to go very quickly. And again, that's not surprising here. Gas shoppers, again, that immediate transition much slower. But I think this one is the most interesting of all. Oh, there we go. When in the future will you be purchasing a BEV? And now we can see, going back to that long discussion I had earlier, and that is, what does it look like for folks that are thinking about doing this at some point? And you can see actually over, say, 5 years, the majority of gas and hybrid shoppers are, if they're going to do it, if they say, yeah, I can see that in my future at some point, the majority of them will probably be purchasing one within 5 years. Now, I left a piece of information out of when I first started with these charts, and that is the gas shoppers who are saying, no way am I ever going to do this. That's 35% are saying never to BEVs. God bless them. That's fine. We're going to have plenty of ICE vehicles out there for them to buy. But again, going back to that idea of adoption, especially as that, once we get past that chasm, which really is about the infrastructure, about being able to charge your car, about longer ranges, those kinds of things that make people feel comfortable. I think we're going to start to see, again, in those lower left charts, we're going to start to see some real growth in BEV sales. So again, going back to my dealer audience and thinking about this, this is a big decision for you all. I know that. We all know that. And that is, how do you think about, again, retooling your dealership, be it in fixed operations, be it in sales, being in your revenue profit mix, being in your advertising, being everything? How do you retool your dealership, and when do you do that? And so, again, what we want to bring forward to you all is thinking about this kind of adoption curve and these kinds of folks, and helping you make that determination of what you start to do and when you start to do it, or quite frankly, maybe you never do it. And that's an okay, an acceptable approach as well. All right, so why are people—
And I'll just say real quick on that 35% number, this is something we hear from dealers quite a bit, is that people aren't really interested in EVs. And this all is very dependent on where they are. Obviously, this isn't the West Coast, but many dealers are saying our shoppers just aren't interested. And so I think that 35% number is accurate. I think that is what they're experiencing. I think that is real and it's happening. But and when Peter was talking about adoption curves and smartphones, and when smartphones first came out, that wasn't something that everyone was willing to spend. No one, the idea of someone spending $500 on a phone was ludicrous at the time, let alone now they're $800-900. And not only are my kids addicted to phones, but my parents are addicted to their phones. I mean, people that you wouldn't think. So today they might be saying 35% never, but when EVs become more commonplace, it just might become the way things are.
Yeah, I agree, Dave. Your neighbor gets one, they rave about it. Maybe you get a chance to drive it, and all of a sudden you go, wow, this is actually a fun car to drive. Yeah. And so those attitudes, I think, again, once the concerns, the fears are addressed, and a lot of folks are working on addressing those concerns, we're going to see some pretty significant growth there. So again, back to that, how you plan for your dealership future. That's why we wanted to bring all this information to you. So, right now, again, the folks that are looking at BEVs, those primary intenders, what's driving that? And it kind of goes back to that conversation I mentioned earlier. They like the cool new stuff. They're the ones that really want to, have the shiniest, the newest, and of course, that second bar, the fastest car in the neighborhood. Dave gets worried about that. His brother must be a police officer or something. I don't know, but there you go. Tax incentives, it's a motivator as well, but clearly, again, the advanced technology, the shiny new things, the fast, fun car to drive, those is motivating. The cost effectiveness is there, but not as much of a driver. And interestingly enough, I think a lot of folks maybe on this call and folks we've talked to kind of think that all the BEV buyers are tree huggers. We're not seeing that. I mean, we're definitely seeing some folks that are concerned about the environment, but a lot of the motivation then is what's in it for me. So again, thinking about, your shoppers, thinking about qualifying, listening very intently to them, because I know that, we'll talk to folks in sales and they'll say, we're not hearing that from our customers. I'm a researcher. I would argue that sometimes you just have to step back and let somebody, talk about, what they're thinking about. And you may get surprised. Going back to our survey and the previous numbers we showed you, there may be more people interested than you've heard from, or you understand what they're saying. Just saying. All right. So what are some of the blockers? What are the things that the gas driver, the gas intenders is saying? I don't know. I don't want a BEV. And of course, we talked earlier about that lower cost of ownership, and we put the example out there of sticker price. The gas vehicle versus the electric vehicle, and to some extent the tax incentives, if you understand them and know how to take advantage of them, then that can alleviate some of that lower cost of ownership. There is that idea that Dave talked about, and that is understanding, the total cost of ownership across the entire life of the vehicle, which goes to maintenance, tires, insurance, et cetera. Gas shoppers are still saying, I think it's going to be too expensive for me. We do believe that will change in attitude as well as reality as more and more EVs hit the road. More reliable compared to BEV. I personally am a little bit troubled by that one. I'm not sure exactly in the numbers. Dave will correct me, but I believe somewhere's around there's 2,000 parts to a gas engine, a drivetrain, and something like 3 or 4 to an EV. So I do know that there's other things within the vehicle that again are, be it gas, be it electric, the shocks, struts, steering assembly, et cetera, they still matter. But boy, what a difference as far as, what it's going to take to maintain this car. Let's just real quickly go over and look at the hybrid side. It's somewhat similar. There's still, the hybrid folks are saying that a hybrid vehicle is more reliable than a BEV. I understand that. I mean, there's been a hybrid out there for, I don't know, Dave, probably 15 years, if not longer.
Longer,
yeah. So they're proven technology. I see I'm not going to mention the brand, but I see a very popular hybrid brand driving around. It looks like it's, they've really gotten their mileage out of those vehicles. So it is a proven technology. So it's going to take a little while for people to feel more comfortable with the reliability of BEV, which kind of goes back to this notion of, I don't think it's reliable. So there needs to be more actual lived experience proof points to start to get rid of that concern. Lower cost of ownership, we talked. So these are the things that are, again, folks that are saying there's still some constraints, infrastructure, charging, all those things are keeping people from moving forward. All right, so I'm going to toss this back over to Dave, who's going to talk a little bit about where does the dealer fit in and how can the dealer help people figure out what's the best product for them.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So the role of the dealership here in terms of clearing up the confusion is pretty significant. And as we get into this first slide, you're going to have to bear with me because it kind of explains pretty much where the influence is coming from. I think we can just show the first, yeah. So the one of the odd things that popped up in this survey that I was not expecting was just how important it was to know someone, a friend or a family member that owned an EV in terms of what your shopping preference was going to be. We actually have another blog on the website focused just on this aspect, and it's a little blown out in the white paper as well, if you want to download that. But it's clear that a huge amount of EV shoppers know someone else in their sphere that owns an EV. This is how they're learning about it. And then when you look at that gas shopper, I mean, 37% of gas shoppers know someone with an EV. That's it. All those other gas shoppers, at 63%, they don't know anyone in their life that owns an EV. And so I kind of, you could look at this like you look at politics and how people have their own little bubbles and don't listen to certain news and only hear one thing. It's very similar in terms of knowing someone that has an EV right now, because even with 7% or 10% adoption, that's not enough to infiltrate neighborhoods. So it's a huge factor. And so if they don't know anyone that has it, it's going to change what they're doing. And if you look at this other number, which is just huge, that the purchase decision, so these are just the shoppers on the left, if they knew someone, the fact that their purchase decision was directly influenced by a friend or family member has doubled since we did the survey last time with EV shoppers. So everyone's asking, well, what does this have to do with the dealer? Well, as we move, we can move forward here. People are coming in with pretty good ideas of what an EV is like if they're shopping for one, but if they're not, there's obviously a disconnect. So again, here, let's just go to the next slide. So it comes down to the test drive. So we have all these EV shoppers that have friends and family with an EV. And we have these other shoppers with less so, but these shoppers, they let them, 35% of their friends and family let them test drive it. So they're not coming into the dealer the first time to test drive it. So they're pretty sold. They've got this other sphere of influence where if you look at the gas powered and hybrid shoppers, they have much less experience with an EV. And so as we keep moving on, this test drive, this idea of a test drive in an EV, sure, an EV experience is very different, right? There's that instant torque, it's very quiet. And so that's unique on a 10, 15-minute test drive that you'd have for any car at a dealership, but it's living with an EV that makes the biggest change in someone's experience with this technology. And so dealerships have to think, are we really going to just keep doing a 10, 15-minute test drive with this technology when it's the fact of living and plugging in at home that sells it, right? That makes people happy, that they never have to go to a gas station again. And so the idea we asked is like, if you could get, an overnight loan instead of a 10 to 15-minute drive, would that change? And for the gas shopper that, who wasn't considering, it is 59%, is pretty high in our opinion, and then 73% for the hybrids. So, you whether it's, maybe not just a loan program outright, but if you want to take the EVs on your lot and put them in the service fleet rotation, things like that, coming up with unique ways to get people exposure over a longer amount of time, that's going to definitely change their opinion of it. And again, if the intention is to sell these EVs, it's something we're going to have to consider doing, these longer loans. And then that other huge part of confusion is around incentives. Now, if you go to the next slide, no one likes to deal with taxes, and so tax incentives are essentially, they're gonna come down to your tax form at the end of the year. And now most of the EV shoppers we surveyed said they understood the tax incentive, something like 80-something%. I forget what the full number was. But those who didn't, who said, I don't know what to do with the tax incentive, 89% of those people said, I want the dealer to explain it to me, which is a large number. So if the dealer isn't, on top of tax incentives, how they apply, and again, like they're changing all the time, and I don't say that flippantly, they will change again come Jan 1, right? There's a different way of claiming the incentives at the end of as the new year turns over versus this year. That's a lot for a salesperson when, 2.5% of what they're selling is an EV, or 5%, or let's say it's 7 or 10%. it's still a lot to learn. After all the other things they need to remember, it's in terms of just a sale, right? It's it's hard enough to make a sale, let alone explaining a tax incentive. So having that figured out in a simple way and simple language, maybe having a cheat sheet that you have on hand for shoppers as they come in, super important. And as we saw earlier in the survey from some of Peter's slides, tax incentives matter. And again, when we talk about the leasing too, it will change that lease program. And some of those lease deals right now on EVs are phenomenal because the incentive is baked in and people just don't understand that. So the dealer becomes much more integral to this process than some might think.
Yeah, great information, Dave. If I could just add a little bit to it. First of all, I've been in the market for several years for a new car, and I'm a slow decider. I'm probably in that 3-year horizon, but probably much sooner than 3 years. And I've seen some beautiful ICE cars. I mean, just gorgeous cars that I would love to own. I'm kind of a little bit of a comfort / performance driver. I'm sure there's others like me out there. And like I said, beautiful vehicles that are proven, that are, wonderful. And I'm actually afraid to drive a BEV, because I think I'll fall in love with it. And I'm not ready to just have that kind of experience where I fall in love with a car. Now, understand that the fleets are converting over to EVs. That it actually, they're seeing some economics in doing that. So more and more people who are renting a car could end up driving an EV and, quote, falling in love. And to Dave's point, and we talked to a number of folks who run large dealer groups. To some extent, they have luxury brands in there, but not just luxury. When they're doing loaner cars for service appointments, they give the customer, again, their brand, what they sell in an EV, and they talk about a phenomenal hit rate of the folks that come back and say, you know what, I'm ready to do an equity deal, get me into this car. So going back to how does the dealership, again, given that's your business plan, that you want to appeal to that EV shopper, and if you have a market area where you're not thinking about appealing to the EV shopper, but you have those folks in market, then you're kind of cutting down, your market share. They go to somebody else. Again, people are not necessarily loyal to brand. If they want an EV, if they heard it from their friends and family, if they drove an EV, however they drove it, you could have defection, and that's something, we don't want to have. Lastly, and this is just my own personal humble thought, I'm the worst person when it comes to taxes. I fumble my way through TurboTax. I pay way too much. It's terrible. And anybody that can help me understand how I can save money is going to be my friend. So again, I would say for dealers, having at least a working knowledge to discuss that, but of course also making sure that people understand that in order to really understand their taxes, they should, seek a qualified professional, or maybe buy some of that spendy software that I buy. Just a thought there. All right. So we're going to wrap up with just some, what are our takeaways from this project? What is it we learned? And we'll open up for questions. All right. So with that, we did the poll, and surprisingly, it turns out that at least with the folks that we heard from, the folks that are going to be driving more, certainly on their daily commute and their average miles per year, they're probably EV intenders. They're the folks that are going to be saying, yep, I think I'll save money by getting an EV, or at least considering it. 82% of the shoppers that we heard from, the folks that are going to buy a BEV, considering strongly to buy a BEV, again, to Dave's point, a really high recommendation number. And, that's the strongest, word of mouth is the strongest selling tactic that you can ever have. And, we can actually do a separate webinar on that, but we're not going to do that today. And the test drive really matters. Again, that's where the dealership can help out. The folks that think they can understand the tax incentive and are kind of excited by that, they think that will help bring down that sticker price and reduce the overall cost of ownership across the life of the vehicle, 82%. Hybrid buyers are kind of on the sidelines. They're willing to buy another hybrid, but they're waiting. A lot of them are waiting to see that their brands launch that BEV. So again, going back to that 3-year, 5-year adoption curve, if they're not going to buy a BEV right away, if they're willing to, do a gradual transition, as we saw, then, you've probably got the right product for them, and you can get them into a hybrid car. And then, of course, earn that loyalty and stay with them, such that when they decide to make their next change, that the BEV, some of those challenges and concerns are gone, and it becomes an easy sell. And then lastly, it turns out, interestingly enough, a lot of folks out there who are in market are at least open to the idea. I think, and I want to qualify this. We did a general population study, so it's across the entire U.S., which means that we're going to get a little more on the urban and more on the suburban side and less on the rural side. So there's some skew there. But, again, of that general audience across the U.S., we got a pretty strong signal that people are open to buying a BEV and they can see themselves one in the next couple of years. And so that, I think we're going to open it up for the questions from the audience.
Peter and Dave, thank you very much for that great information. You covered so much ground, and I think the number of questions what we have reflects that. So we're going to turn it over to the audience. Trying to prioritize right now. Okay. Geez, I mean, you spent a lot of time speaking about, people charging from home. So let's start with a question that's pertaining to that. So this is a question from Mike. He said, how can I see the slide again of where do EV owners plan to charge their EVs?
Let me go back to that one.
Yeah, so that we can go back, but that was all. Sorry, I selected that one as a softball. We did want to make sure that everyone understood that you can download the full study PDF at cdkglobal.com/insights. It is obviously more of a written out document than this presentation. But yeah, we there's the stat there for you. But yeah, so please, if you need any clarity on anything you saw, please go there. Yeah, there you go.
So, I mean, everybody, I think, who's thinking about this is thinking about installing chargers and how complicated is that. There's a question here from Richard. He's saying, did you ask if people planning residential charging expect any problems having a charger installed, or what would be your expectation of that answer?
Yeah,
go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter. But this is another softball where our ownership survey coming up is going to address that. But go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to say we didn't ask that specific question. I do know that more and more dealerships are working with their local utilities to make this easy. We believe that there's opportunity there. Opportunity for the dealership to work with the local utility and possibly with certified electrical contractors to offer a package to customers to make it easy to put charging systems in their home. Otherwise, that person is kind of left to their own devices to figure out how to do that. You can always, my understanding, you can always wall plug these things, but that's going to take a long time. So getting something that carries a little more weight on it is a good way to go.
Yeah, and even without the numbers, when you ask that question, most of the time people are installing level 2s if they're installing. So yeah, and it's interesting. The first EVs I tested, the very first Nissan Leaf, a dozen years ago, you could plug into the wall overnight. The ones today with the giant batteries that get 250, 300 miles range, you cannot do that and expect to have that full charge in the morning. So yeah, that's why I think we saw that number of 87% looking to install that charger being so high.
Well, the opposite side of this is that, and certainly there have been commercials down in Texas where if you get a pretty smart electrician and you get yourself an F-150 Lightning, you can turn around and power your house during electrical blackout, which is kind of an interesting and unique little feature.
So I think you've somehow answered another question here, because it sounds like everyone's installing level 2. So if they're going to go through that process, they're going to put a level 2 in. So that's true. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A really interesting question here from Scott. Should OEMs be more aggressive in their marketing /websites /social media on the facts about BEV production, GHG impact versus hybrids or plug-in hybrids? For example, an industry stat indicates that for every one BEV, 90 hybrids can be produced that result in 37% lower emissions overall. Do we need to educate a BEV intender to ensure they are making their best decision?
Wow, that's a big one, and so we've seen stat. I don't know if those are the exact numbers on 1 to 90 or whatever it was, but we know you can make more hybrids. Right now, I think what I like to say is it's picking the best vehicle for your lifestyle. And while, on the production side, that, the materials that go into it, at this stage with people selecting because of technology and this is what they want, they're not picking on that environmental side of things. So I'm not sure if that's something for, us to tell you is better. I mean, there's an EV Hummer, but the gas powered, full size SUVs are selling at some of their best rates of all time right now. So, it's really in this country, especially when you look at the adoption rates in Europe versus the US. In the US, people buy what they want, and it's consumer choice all the way around. So, that's kind of my political answer to that one.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, that's fantastic because, and by the way, we've seen those numbers, and we see some of the I would call it field sales literature that goes to the dealerships. Again, is the argument pro? Is the argument something else? I would say, the OEMs, and there are plenty of them, have different reasons for how they message to their dealers and how they message to the buying public. Some of that may happen to be around build plans or market acceptance. There's various reasons why they're following a current marketing strategy they're following, or a sales enablement strategy they're following at this point in time. Today's point, the buyer is king, buyer is queen, the buyer's in charge. And again, I've said it before, I'm going to say it again, based on the brands that you represent, and that's important too, but based on the brands that you represent, think about the data that we've brought to you, and then how are you going to work with that shopper to understand their needs and their desires and put the right product in front of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, gentlemen, we have can't speak, 4 minutes for a couple more questions. So here is one from Ron. I think it's very interesting. Was there an unaided response opportunity, or did you ask specifically about battery safety / fire as a reason for rejection? Anecdotes about some EV intenders changing course recently after some recent publicized events, because I think we're all seeing those publicized events.
Yeah, we didn't ask that question. It's a really interesting one. Possibly one in the future. We do have our EV owners survey that we're about to launch, and of course, that's experiential. Did you burn down your house because of your BEV? God willing, God hope not. But no, and it's a really interesting one. I wish I had an answer that we put it in our research. We did not.
Yeah, and if you put on your EV fanboy hat, the EV crowd will point out repeatedly that thermal events, as we call them, happen much more frequently with gas vehicles than they do with EVs. But the EVs, because of the intensity of the fires and how hard they are to put out, get a lot of headlines. So again, I'll play that political middle road.
Okay, I will remain silent on this as well. Okay, one more, I think at least one more question here. So your research suggests that Gen Zs are tech savvy people, yet they are most likely to go to dealerships when purchasing a vehicle. So do you have any, hypothesis on that? Yeah,
we can talk a lot about Gen Z and the other generations. And this is more generic than necessarily related to EVs. It's for a lot of Gen Zs, it's their first car. And so what we find from some of the other surveys we do is that they actually will spend a lot of time at the dealership, really understanding their choices and really trying to get educated. They get educated before they come to the dealership, but they're looking to the dealership and they're looking for expert opinion. And so something that I think, again, our audience should keep in mind that's the kind of the mentality of those shoppers. Definitely, they are tech savvy, or certainly a lot of them, although I would also argue that more generations, it's hard to argue with, truth in advertising, my mother is 98 years old and she loves the internet and smartphones. So I think we want to get a little bit away from this tech savviness idea. The thing that's potentially preventing Gen Zs from really adopting BEVs goes back to the idea of owning a home. That's going to be the gate for a lot of them, is that home ownership. So again, thinking about those generations, you want to, again, going through your needs assessment, you want to think about the young and old millennial type and maybe the Gen X, and thinking about that sweet spot, again, those daily commutes, the soccer game, the getting the kids to school, going to work, all those things, that starts to become a real sweet spot when you look at generations and think about who could be a good BEV shopper.
Yeah, and real fast, I know we're at time, but this question goes into a lot of that idea of, will EVs make all OEMs try and sell directly to customers online? Comes up quite a bit, and kind of similar to this. And what we found in other surveys we do a monthly pulse survey of hundreds of shoppers. They are not buying cars online, entirely online, not like 0 to 1%. It is a very small number opting to do that. It's not obviously the most wide scale thing available, but they're not choosing it. And a fair amount are completing the entire purchase process, not necessarily research, but purchase process at the dealer, or a hybrid between some steps online, like getting credit approved, et cetera, and then finishing at the dealer. So the dealer is still far and away, whether it's an EV from an OEM or a gas car, overwhelmingly focused at the dealership level.
Well, that's really good intel. Well, I think we're just about out of time, gentlemen.
Thank you, everybody. It's been, I've certainly had a lot of fun. Dave, as always, and yes. Emma, thank you very much as well.
Yes, thank you.
There are so many questions we didn't get to. So I want to thank today's audience for all of those questions. And rest assured, if you asked a question that we didn't get a chance to answer, our friends at CDK Global will follow up by email. If you learned something from this session, please tell your peers about it. The recording will be available in about an hour. You'll find it at autonews.com/webinars. When the webinar ends, a survey will pop up on your screen. We genuinely appreciate your feedback, as it helps us create future webinars that are even more beneficial to you. Thanks again to Peter, Dave, and CDK Global for bringing us this presentation, and to you for joining us. On behalf of everyone at Automotive News, have a great rest of your day.